It has been a while since I have been on the pod. Sometimes life takes over and then there's laziness. The three of us had planned to do a recording today, but then we decided against it. A pod today would have been too nihilistic and what is the point of sharing the same thing when everyone else is feeling that same way? And frankly, at this point in my life, I honestly have felt this sense of loss too many times, too many hopeless days, and a part of me just wants to unplug and distract myself. And obviously, I'm under no illusion about what I do as something that is important. But even then, one tends to feel, what is the point? And and if you're feeling that way today, I am with you. Do what you can to make yourself feel calmer. There is this other part of me, though, that acknowledges the privilege that I am allowed, the privilege that enables me to even have the option to plug out, because many do not. Certainly not the Indian minorities or people like Umar Khalid, people who have been imprisoned for Bhima Koregaon. They did not. Neither did Stan Swami. And as I said, many, many, many others. And in my own little small role, I also feel some kind of duty to share a note. After all, the whole point of us doing what we do is to disturb the comforted and comfort the disturbed. So please feel free to tune out now, because perhaps the rest of this is just going to be the same message expanded out.
Long years ago, we made a trip with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से
चीफ मिनिस्टर के लिए मेरा एक ही संदेश है कि वो राज धर्म का पालन करें।
हार्डवेयर वालों की सोच क्या होती है, हार्ड वर्क वालों की सोच क्या होती है।
अरे ये ना पंजाब की खुशबू।
So, where do I go when I need to remember that impossible timescales have been survived before? I start in 1964 with a man in a prison cell. In 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was 46 years old. The apartheid regime was at the height of its power. International sanctions were minimal. The Cold War meant that Western powers largely turned a blind eye. If you were a prisoner on Robben Island in 1964, looking at the political landscape, you had every reason to believe that apartheid would outlast you. Mandela spent 27 years in prison. 27 years. And nearly a decade of that in a cell that was so small that he could touch both walls with his arms outstretched. He was breaking rocks in a limestone quarry that damaged his eyesight permanently. He was allowed one visitor every 6 months, one letter every 6 months, and the letters were censored, redacted, or sometimes never even delivered. Here's why I'm talking about those years. Mandela did not spend time waiting for the political situation to change. He couldn't. The timescale was too long, the odds too impossible. Instead, he did something else. He studied Afrikaans because he believed you couldn't negotiate with people whose language you don't speak. He read voraciously, poetry, history, political theory. He exercised every morning in his cell. He mediated disputes among fellow prisoners. He learned the names of the guards' children. When a new warden arrived at Robben Island, a man known for his particular cruelty, Mandela made it his project to understand him. It took years, but eventually that warden became one of Mandela's most important allies. I'm not telling you the story to suggest we should be nice to people who oppress us. I'm telling you this because Mandela understood something big about how change actually happens. He understood that change happens through the accumulation of small human interactions, through the daily practice of treating even your enemies as human beings capable of change, through the discipline of maintaining your own humanity when everything around you is designed to strip it away. When Mandela finally walked out of prison in 1990, apartheid didn't end just like that, because it was not like the National Party had developed a conscience. It ended because of international pressure, economic sanctions, internal resistance, and ANC's armed struggle, of course. But it also ended because Mandela had spent those 27 years preparing for a negotiated transition rather than a bloodbath. He had built relationships, he had learned the language, he had found common ground where none seemed to exist. He once said, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy, and then he becomes your partner. One of the great stories that I have of Mandela is when he becomes president, his well-wishers and close friends ask him to change his security detail because his security detail was of bodyguards who were all white. And he said, if I do that, what will it signal to the rest of the country? And so he never did that. He kept his security detail as is. So here we are today. The political map of India continues to turn more and more saffron, and many of us are asking, what now? What do we do when the electoral math seems impossible? When the institutions we relied on appear captured? When the media landscape is so thoroughly dominated that our version of reality barely registers? I want to suggest something that might sound like retreat, but it isn't. I think at this point it is perhaps useful, maybe even necessary, to stop looking at only the political part of the things. Because the scale of political change required can be so overwhelming that it can paralyze us. We see the mountain and we don't know where to begin moving it. So instead of trying to move mountains, maybe we start somewhere smaller, somewhere more immediate. Our personal relationships. The small conversations we have with people in our daily lives. The uncle at the wedding who says something that makes your blood boil. The colleague who shares that specific WhatsApp forward. The old friend who's drifted towards a politics you find abhorrent. Our instinct in this moment is often to either argue ferociously or to withdraw entirely, to either bombard them with facts and logic, hoping to win the debate, or to write them off as lost causes and retreat into our bubble of the like-minded. But perhaps there can be a third way. The writer and activist Loretta Ross has a concept she calls calling in, as opposed to calling out. Calling out is public, performative, designed to shame. Calling in is private, relational, designed to persuade. She doesn't use it for everyone. Some people are just not reachable. And some contexts demand public accountability. But for people in your actual life, people you have some relationship with, she argues for a different approach. It starts with finding common ground. Maybe it's concern for your child's future. Maybe it's frustration with corruption. Maybe it's pride in your neighborhood or your profession or your city. Maybe it's just the fact that you've known each other over 20 years and you remember when they weren't like this. You start there, on that common ground. And then, very carefully, very patiently, you try to build a bridge from there to the thing you actually want them to understand. This is not about winning arguments. Arguments, especially about politics, almost never change minds. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt has shown that when it comes to moral and political beliefs, we make decisions emotionally and then construct rational justifications around it, which means facts alone would not work, data would not work, logic would not work. What could work is shifting the emotional foundation. And you can't shift someone's emotional foundation by attacking them, by making them defensive, by making them feel stupid or evil. I have been guilty many times of doing this. You can only shift it by first making them feel seen, heard, respected even, showing your disagreement and showing respect, both together. James Baldwin wrote, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. The people in your life who've embraced a politics that you think and consider, rightly so, a politics of hate, they're often running from something. Fear, usually humiliation, loss of status, or certainty, or control. Your job is not to take away that fear. You can't. Your job is to offer a different way of responding to it, perhaps through something else, solidarity, collective action, a different story about who's responsible for their pain and what might actually address it. This approach is slow, painfully slow. You're not going to change your uncle's politics in one dinner conversation. You're probably not going to change that in 10. But you might plant a seed of doubt. You might make them slightly less certain. You might preserve the relationship so the conversation can continue. And that continuation matters because political change, real political change, does not happen through single dramatic moments by themselves. It happens through the slow accumulation of shifted perspectives, through the gradual erosion of what once seemed like common sense. In US, you can think about how gay marriage went from unthinkable to inevitable in a single generation. It wasn't primarily through legal arguments or political campaigns. Those mattered, of course. But it was through millions of people coming out to their families, their friends, their co-workers. It was through personal relationships, making abstract political positions impossible to maintain. To say that I don't support gay marriage is easy when gay people are an abstraction. It's much harder when it's your own son, your own sister, your best friend from college. One of the things that I often think about is India still is such a segregated society that a lot of the people rarely, if ever, meet people from outside their social, economic, and religious background unless they are involved in some sort of business transactions. And I do not know how to change that. But one of the things that we can do is try to make those who like us, who love us, who respect us, to see the third other as human enough. And that is why it is important to tell the stories of people who are on the margins uh, through films and stories and videos and podcasts and however. But we have to humanize the other, especially who's more and more being dehumanized in our popular culture. The same principles that apply to the change in the view of gay marriages in the US applies in India. Your job in your small corner of the world is to make abstractions harder, to insist on the particular, on the human. Now, let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you should tolerate abuse. If someone in your life is actively harming you or people you love, you have every right to protect yourself, including by cutting them off. I'm not saying you should endlessly perform emotional labor for people who don't reciprocate it. There's a difference between patient persuasion and being someone's punching bag. I am not saying this is the only thing we should do. Organize, protest, litigate, vote, you know, support independent media, fund opposition candidates. to mutual aid, all of that matters enormously. I'm just saying, don't underestimate the political significance of the personal. Don't think that because you can't change the national electoral map, your conversations don't matter. They do, maybe more than you think. Because the thing about authoritarianism is it relies on isolation, on atomization, on people being so divided that collective action becomes impossible, seems impossible. Every action, every conversation you have that maintains human connection across political differences is a small act of resistance against that atomization. Every time you find common ground with someone you disagree with, you are making the world slightly harder to split into camps. You're keeping alive the possibility of persuasion, of changed minds, of a future politics that isn't just tribalism all the way down. Mandela walked out of prison in 1990. 4 years later, he became president. In between, he spent countless hours negotiating with the same people who had imprisoned him, people who had overseen torture, assassination, the systemic degradation of millions. He didn't do this because he'd forgiven them. Forgiveness is much more complicated, personal, not something you can demand of anyone. He did it because he understood that the alternative was civil war, that South Africa could become another Algeria or Angola, where the end of colonial rule meant decades of bloodshed. So, he swallowed his rage. He found common ground. He made deals. And yes, the transition was imperfect. Economic apartheid largely remained. Justice was incomplete, but the country didn't tear itself apart. I think about that when I look at West Bengal, when I look at the national map, when I try to imagine a future politics in India that isn't just endless escalation of communal hatred. I don't know if we'll get there. I don't know if the damage can be undone. But I know that if there's any path back from where we are, it runs through millions of small conversations, through the slow, unglamorous work of maintaining relationships across differences, through the discipline of finding common ground even, especially even when it feels impossible. This is not the hope of optimism, which believes things will necessarily get better. This is the hope of commitment, which decides to act as if change is possible because that action itself is what makes it possible. So here's what I'm asking of you and of myself. In your personal life, with the people you actually encounter, try to find that common ground. Some people aren't reachable, and that's okay. But with the ones who might be, the ones who haven't completely closed their minds, the ones who you remember being different, reach out. And don't try to win the argument in one conversation. Try to preserve the relationship so there can be more conversations. Try to shift the emotional ground beneath the political position. Try to make abstraction harder by insisting on the human. This won't change the electoral map next week, but over years, over decades, these accumulated small changes in how people see each other, that matters. That's how the impossible becomes possible. That's how Mandela walked out of that cell and apartheid fell. We have to look beyond political actions and elections and have to look at social change. Because I think at the core of it, the soul of our society needs to be relooked at. And and I don't know how this will change, but I think even elections and whichever way they go will not fundamentally change the kind of people we are becoming. And it often feels pointless, but it's also the only thing we can actually control. We can't control election results. We can't control what the media reports or what goes viral, but we can control how we show up in our lives, how we talk to people, whether we preserve connection or sever it. And in times of political defeat, maybe that's where hope lives. We can't see far enough to know how that thing turns out, but in the daily practice of remaining human with each other, of refusing the easy comfort of tribal hatred, of doing the hard work of persuasion, one conversation at a time, we can hope for something to change at some point. This is the BJPod. We will talk soon. Take care.